Hey, this is Todd, and I wanted to talk about building a better dungeon puzzle room. Funny, I'm recording a video about building a better puzzle room, but the first thing I'm going to talk about is actually how I dislike puzzle rooms in dungeons. But the reason why I'm going to bring up my objections or why I dislike them is so that we can use those to hopefully build better versions of puzzle rooms. So there are probably two things I dislike about puzzle rooms. Number one is they tend to lack context. Often, as a party, you enter the room and you know you're entering the ye old puzzle room, and it often feels artificial. It feels like you're entering this room that was dropped there to be a puzzle. So you've had combat encounter, X encounter, and then all of a sudden, here is the puzzle room, and there'll be something, and it will very obviously be this puzzle that was layered on top of the room for you to deal with. It doesn't feel like it's integrated into the fiction of the place. That can often be because it has no real bearing on the place, and that the puzzle that you're solving to progress doesn't really have anything to do with where you are. So you're in a goblin mine, but this puzzle has you making a shape on the floor, or makes you, or is about you creating words or turning things into words. What does it have to do with the goblin mine? Nothing. It was just a puzzle somebody found, and they thought it would be fun or difficult or interesting for you to solve, so they dropped it in there. There's also usually a lack of foreshadowing. Oftentimes, you just end up in the puzzle room, and any clues you're going to glean about the puzzle room are only from that room. Its existence is never mentioned anywhere. You're never going to find anything outside of the puzzle room that will pertain to the puzzle room. So it ends up being this self-contained, and again, that's another reason why it might feel artificial, this self-contained block that was just plopped there into the space for you to play with. I think sometimes we lose track of as a GM that the entire game is in essence a puzzle. If a puzzle is overcoming an obstacle, either just being able to overcome it at all or being able to overcome it in the most efficient way using the least amount of resources, whether it's health or spells or bits of equipment or whatnot to progress, then the game itself is a puzzle. And within that puzzle of the game, the dungeon itself is a puzzle. And everything in that dungeon already has puzzle-like qualities. So I don't necessarily feel the strong need to then layer another puzzle on top of it, particularly when often that puzzle actually pulls us out of the fiction. If we're adventurers tromping through the dungeon and now we're in a room where you have to fulfill a word puzzle, play a little mini game of Scrabble to try to figure out how to get in the door, it doesn't generally keep us in the game. It's almost like here's a meta activity. Okay, you've gone through the dungeon, now here, do this little crossword puzzle, and then you can advance. But I think that these issues can be overcome, and we can do a better job of building integrated puzzles that make sense. When I'm talking about puzzles, like I just mentioned, there's the general sense of a puzzle as any kind of obstacle. What I'm going to concentrate on is what I would say, I guess, three main types of puzzles when I think we think of puzzle rooms or puzzle spaces that we'll look at. One is your environmental puzzle. And some people may not even think of this as a puzzle at all, but it could be something as simple as there's a pit in the floor. So there's an open pit trap in the hallway. How do you get across? That in itself is a puzzle. But it is one that is obviously very grounded in the environment. It could be there's been a cave-in, and how do you progress to get past this cave-in to get to the rest of the hallway? Or there's a chasm, or any number of things. You have to climb a wall. Whatever it is, that is a puzzle. The party has to come together to think about it, pool their resources, their knowledge, their tools, see how they can get across. And I actually really like those kinds of puzzles because you're in character. You're not thinking about, well, gee, how can I make a crossword, or how can I look at this word problem or a logic puzzle, or do this a Sudoku to get across, but it's really how can I use my character abilities and what equipment that we have and what powers we have and what spells we have to get across. Another one is the puzzle as a trial or an ordeal or a test. And this is what I would say is a overt puzzle. You're going to enter a space that is obviously a puzzle or puzzle room or puzzle area. You're not trying to hide the fact that it's a puzzle. It could be the labyrinth that you might go into with or without the Minotaur at the middle. It could be something you would see maybe in a temple. I think of something like the Freemasons or mystery cult religions from the Roman and Greco-Roman, times. This idea that you've taken this space and you've decided that something beyond this space you want to protect, but you're not trying to protect it in the sense of just hide it. Because then why would you put a puzzle there? Why would you put anything there? That a puzzle would only basically put a spotlight on the fact that there's something there. What you're saying is that I want this thing to be guarded or protected, but I want somebody to be able to come and get it. And that person needs to be tested. They need to pass this trial to prove themselves worthy for this, which is why I think it works very well for religious, spiritual type themes. There also could be something like there's a magic device. Someone's going to need this wand of wishes, but we want to make sure that that person is pure or whatever. So we're going to have them undergo these trials to get there. We're not necessarily hiding that there is some kind of item behind here, but we want to make sure that they pass the trial. So we're talking about a overt puzzle. You're going to enter the space and you're going to know pretty well off or be able to discern pretty quickly that there's a puzzle, and it's obvious because they want you to solve it. Or at least they want somebody to solve it. Again, I could see a secret society doing something like this. It might not be obvious to just anybody, but someone who has some knowledge of the secret society would maybe enter a space and understand that this is a ritual area and that they set this up for members to be able to prove that they have the knowledge necessary to go forth maybe into an inner sanctum or to some other area. They need to sort of show that they have the knowledge of this secret society. Same thing for any kind of religion or cult that transmits knowledge through allegory or metaphor or has, again, that secret aspect to it. We want to make sure that you have been initiated into the high enough rite. So we're going to have this thing that's going to test you on it could be your spiritual purity. It could just be on your knowledge of any part of the religion. I mean, you could see a Scientology type organization. They have all these steps you're supposed to be taking to move forward and forward. And as you're taking these steps, you're getting more and more information. Well, what if there was some part at the end of it where you as the were meant to put together all this information and then demonstrate through this trial that I know everything I need to know, and so the way is open. I did a video a little bit earlier on the this kind of puzzle house in part 2 of the OA on Netflix. I'll drop a link in, and that's pretty much how that one works. It's set up as a trial to access a sacred area that would give you a revelation, but only if you were able to pass through the trials. The third one is a puzzle as a form of concealment, and this is a covert style of puzzle. You are not broadcasting that there's a puzzle there. You are not broadcasting that there's a secret thing that's being guarded. You're doing this essentially as an alternative to a lock and a key. And you might think about, well, why would you do that? One, the benefit of a puzzle, and this ties it into the puzzle as trial, is that instead of having to a physical lock, so if you have a lock and a key, a lock can be picked, a key can be stolen, a key could break, the lock could break, I suppose that could happen anyway, but in any case, you could end up in a situation in which you need something to pass that you don't have. And since these things, particularly when we're dealing in role-playing games where things sit undisturbed for hundreds, if not thousands of years, these things may be lost. But if you tie it to a puzzle, and that puzzle is tied to something you think people are going to know, in other words, if I think in my family, my children and my children's children and my children's children will always know certain things about it, and I know that maybe my daughter doesn't need to access this thing, but maybe my great-great-great-granddaughter will. If I just give my daughter a key and say, hold this and pass it down, it might make it to my great-great-great-granddaughter, but it might get lost, broken, stolen, whatever. But if I create something that I know that they will all know, maybe it's tied to my family, maybe it's tied to something that we all have in common, then I know that in that time of need, my great-great-great-granddaughter may not even know me, have forgotten about me, maybe never heard of me, but they will be able to take this information that we've passed down and access this thing. That could be, it could be a room in a house, or, a level in a mansion, an inner sanctum, like I mentioned before. Could be a secret hideaway for an item. Could be anything. But the idea is you're not trying to broadcast it to everybody. You're not trying to say, hey, everybody, there's a puzzle here and there's something behind the puzzle. Because all that's going to do is it's just going to encourage people to go for it. The other reason why you might have a puzzle is that as 1001 Tales made clear, if you lock a door, someone's going to try to open it. So if you're a king in a castle, if you're Prince Humperdinck, you can't just have your torture room somewhere where people are going to get at it, because anybody might just come by, open the door, become curious, whatever. So you put it in the woods, you hide the door in that fake tree, and only you and Count Rugen and the albino know about it. And so the people who have access have it, people who don't. And because it's not there, nobody asks questions about it. So really, in that category, any kind of secret door, secret passage, secret hidey hole, secret panel, that's all those kinds of covert puzzles. You need to find it and then figure it out, or do whatever it needs to take, do whatever it takes to get it open. So those are the three ones we're talking about. So we're talking about environment, we're talking about covert puzzles, we're talking about overt puzzles. Let's talk about environment puzzles first. So I already mentioned that really the dungeon itself is a puzzle. Navigating to the dungeon, usually with the dungeon, you're either you're in the modern sense, there's pretty much two kinds of dungeons. There's the old school dungeon, or the mega dungeon type, where it's meant to just be explored and gotten around, and even the navigation's still a thing, but it's for a different purpose. Oftentimes in a mega dungeon situation, you're navigating so that you can make sure you've gotten everything you need to get out of there. Maybe you're trying to find routes further down, deeper into the dungeon, and potentially there's a narrative reason why you want to find it. In other dungeons, obviously, you might be trying to get through it just to get through it. It's a prison break. You need to get out of the prison. The prison complex is the puzzle. You have to find your way out. You're looking for the dragon in its mountain or some other lair or whatever it is. You need to get through it. So the navigational element of the dungeon is itself a puzzle. That's one part of the environmental puzzle. Combat also is a puzzle, and you can make your combat more puzzly. So the first part of combat itself as a puzzle is that it's a resource drain. The more efficiently you can handle combat, the more adventuring you can do before you have to start thinking about taking rests, backtracking out of the dungeon, spending spell slots or spending item charges to use abilities. The faster and quicker you can do things, the more efficiently you can do them, regardless of what activity it is, the better off you are. That is the puzzle, as I mentioned before. But you can also make combat itself more puzzly, and I've talked about this in a couple of the tactics videos that I've done. If you give enemies in dungeons things to do, they're not just there, 3 orcs in a room, and you enter the room, the orcs charge, and you slaughter them, or they slaughter you, whatever. Done. There's the other one of 3 orcs standing in the room, you enter the room, 1 orc runs to go out a back door, or a door on the other side of the room, another orc goes for a pull cord that's going to trigger an alarm, and the third orc puts up a tower shield and essentially takes up a defensive position to block other people from getting at his comrades. Now you have a puzzle, because it's not just about, we just got to kill 3 orcs. It's about, what do we prioritize? Okay, I'm the archer. That guy's running for the door. Maybe he'll get past the door, lock it, and then he'll go for help. That guy's going to ring an alarm. That's going to get help for sure. And do I have line of sight? Do I have a shot? Because that other orc's got a tower shield and he's moved to sort of block the way. What do I do? To the wizard, does he drop an area effect spell? Okay, maybe he does. He can only hit 1 out of the 3, or maybe he can hit 2 out of the 3. How does that work? Has the fighter charged in, and do you risk burning down the fighter in a fireball because you're really trying to get that orc who's going through the door, or trying to do the alarm? However that works, right? So suddenly you've taken this thing that was just 3 orcs in a room, and now you've added a lot of complexity to it. And by the way, that complexity then affects the rest of the dungeon. If that 1 orc escapes down the passageway on the other side and locks that door, it slows you down. It allows him to get help and potentially set up traps or do other things. Obviously, if the other orc rings the alarm, that is going to raise the awareness level of the rest of the dungeon. And then, of course, you just have to deal with that 1 orc who's just trying to prevent you. So you can make your combat more puzzly. Navigation can also be a puzzle. I mentioned that before. It can be as simple as just the maze aspect of you have to find your way through. It can also be environmental hazards, underground streams, cave-ins, some kind of weird fire, any kind of magical thing, pools of, ooze and things that are blocking the way. Anything that the players have to then figure out and try to suss out, mentally how to get through, that will work as a puzzle. So you have that sort of dungeon environment puzzle that I actually think, like I said before, I think is the most integrated because you really don't leave thinking in. You don't need to think outside your character to really think about it. You could play into everything about your character. You're really thinking about how can my character get through this. There's no separation between that and the meta thing as a player of ooh, there's a puzzle. Like you don't even usually think of those as puzzles as a player. You just think of, well, I got to get across. But as a GM, if you're looking at I want to put in puzzly things, those are ways to integrate puzzles without having to drop in an artificial, here is a puzzle. And the other thing that those kind of elements are strong with is what I talked about before as in context. If it's part of the environment, it has that context of the environment. If you know you're going into a ruin or you're going into an old set of caves, all those things that potentially fit in that environment, cave-ins or traps, or obviously antagonistic enemy creatures. These all naturally fit in that context. They're things that the party is going to be preparing for, and they're things that they will automatically be thinking about how they can deal with. So it's kind of right on the wavelength that fits in. Players in a dungeon are going to expect dungeony things. You can deliver those dungeony things. When we're looking at putting in a puzzle as its own thing, so we're going to put in a puzzle, and it's going to be overt. We're putting in here is a puzzle. The thing that often gets lost is not to just think about the puzzle as what is in that specific room, but to think about how it fits in with the entire complex. So if we're looking at a temple, it makes sense that there might be a ritual area, and that ritual area may have access to some sort of inner sanctum or just hidden area, and that ritual space is a puzzle. So then what do we do with that? How do we give it? So we have that context of, okay, temple, ritual space, protecting or as an obstacle to a inner sanctum type area. And it, the key there is that we're trying to, the concept as far as why it was built was to make sure that only those who are worthy get into the inner sanctum. Okay, so we have that. But now we have to think about what that actual puzzle is going to be. And I think there is where we could really let's look at the surrounding context of this area. So let's say we'll take a temple, and let's say it's a temple to a fire god. So we know this is a temple to a fire god, and if I had the fire god stats in front of me, maybe I could look and see, okay, what symbols are important to this fire god? Does he have a particular animals, things like that? All these, what I'm looking for is what motifs can I bring into the puzzle that are going to tie it into this fire god. In Jon Favreau's The Jungle Book, the animals refer to fire as the red flower. I think I've got that right. So here's an idea. So you take that puzzle room, and you don't just take the puzzle room, you take the entire dungeon, you look at it from front to back, and you plant in there, and everywhere that really is appropriate, which is probably going to be almost everywhere, these different motifs with fire, and we center it around the red flower, which represents fire itself. So that could take the form of the sun as a red flower. And, you don't have to be super, I guess I would say is you should be really super on the nose about it, because something that to keep in mind is that whatever seems obvious to you is going to seem not obvious to the party. And part of that is going to be you're working from perfect knowledge and they're not. You may think you're making it super obvious that, hey, look at the red flower as the sun, that's important, but it may not come across in what you actually tell them. And there even may be parts of the spaces where you forget to tell them. So you might say, okay, in this room, there are some murals. And in your mind, you're thinking, oh yeah, there's red flowers all over that. But you didn't tell that to the party when you described the murals. And maybe you're waiting for them to say, ooh, I examined the murals more closely, but then they don't. And so you thought, oh, there's this obvious clue of the red flower, and it's not there. So I would say be super obvious. Don't worry about bludgeoning it into their brains about these motifs you're using, because it won't feel that way to them. So we're going to use red flowers as a motif. Maybe there's other motifs we can go along with it. Maybe I think in the Greco-Roman tradition, the sort of chariot pulling the sun, that might be something. There might be an animal, a bull, maybe. Well, maybe we'll have a bull. I think the Egyptian, there's the bull that has the sun disk in the middle. Maybe we could use something like that, except it's going to be a bull with the sort of sun, but it's going to be the sun as that red flower. And I think by the same token, I said hammer in the fact that the sun, you also want to make sure they understand that there's this symbology is going on. Don't just say, oh, there's red flowers, and then expect them to ask or understand that that red flower means the sun. Just be plain and say, hey, it's a mural of evening with the sun, and the sun is described, or the sun is presented as a red flower on the vine, whatever, however we come up with that. Just make sure to be plain so that they can make those connections. So then we're going to have all this symbology about sun, fire, red flower. When we get to this area, we're going to, double down on this symbology, and we're going to make sure that symbology ties into what's actually happening with this puzzle. So just for an example, let's just say in this puzzle, there's going to be a great, almost looks like a fountain, but it's going to be sort of a great sculpture of some sort. And in the middle, it's going to have, again, all fluted with leaves and things to be like a flower. And it's going to come up to sort of where the flower, the actual flower part of the plant is, and it's going to have a bowl. And I'm thinking that what the party's going to need to do is they're going to need to put oil or something other flammable in there and light that to make a flame. And then on the ceiling above it, I'm going to put, say, another red flower motif, very sun-like, and then maybe I'll even suggest or say that there's a blackening of stuff around that area to indicate that, if they, and again, I would probably be obvious and say that there's soot or ash or something. I guess it would be soot in the ceiling from past fires. Maybe you can even put some waxy residue in the bowl if somebody looks. Maybe you could put some sort of smeary, if it's something that's not, if it's ancient, there probably wouldn't be any traces of the oil left, but maybe if it was more recently used, there might even be some oil left in there potentially. Something to indicate that to get this thing open. So here's the puzzle, I guess, would be that you have this thing, you put oil in there, it creates a kind of a red flower, it illuminates the red flower above, and some magical connection, and a door opens. So here we have a puzzle that may or may not appear puzzly to the players, which, my goal is that you put in puzzle rooms and the players never realize that they're in a puzzle room. They're just looking at it as part of the dungeon. So here we have the puzzle, which is figuring out this idea with the motifs. I have reinforced the motifs in the room. I have reinforced the motifs in the dungeon around it. And then the third part is reinforce it in the world. So something that comes up, you see it more in narrative stories than you tend to in games, or at least in maybe non-published games. I haven't really checked a lot of modules, so I'm not sure if it happens there. But oftentimes, GMs, they drop the puzzle in the room, and sometimes they'll thought about, okay, this is how the puzzle fits into this dungeon, but they don't really think about, well, how does it fit into the world? So if this was a temple of this fire god, how'd the party find out about this temple? Why are they there? What information's out there? There probably is some hint, some clue, or there should be potentially multiple ones about this room in there. This is a main feature of this temple. This fire is, this red flower room, and you could give it a name. And maybe, I've been saying red flower, but maybe we pick an actual flower, find one that's red. We could use roses. There's probably better ones that are more. You can use sunflowers themselves. It's not red, but again, it makes an interesting thing. You have sunflower, and you use that, put that together. So we're going to say, okay, if they've been getting, say there's a treasure map, or say they've been talking to people, someone has sent them, or they figured out to come to this temple, there's probably been something written, spoken, known. Maybe it's legend, maybe it's more concrete than that about this room. To use an example from a book you can look in The Hobbit, there's the puzzle of how do they get into the mountain. The front door is a bad idea. They figure out, or they get the treasure map, or the map that's saying, here, we got to get to the mountain. And the first puzzle, in fact, of that is really the fact that there are, I think they call them moon runes on the map itself. And it's the moon runes that then actually, or I think the moon runes that reveal that there's a location of a hidden door. So the first thing that happens is they just have the map, and then I think it's Elrond then is able to look at the map and say, hey, these are moon runes. There are moon runes on here. Then they look at the moon runes, and the moon runes then show that, hey, there's another entrance over here, and I think they give the clue about on the last light of Durin's Day. So you really have three parts of this puzzle And in fact, they pretty much solve the puzzle before they ever get to that door. By the time they get to the door, they already know what they need to do, which is get there on Durin's Day, have that key, and then you'll do the rest. But they needed to know that the door exists, and to do that, they needed to have the map get revealed. So the first mini puzzle of this puzzle was moon runes on the map get revealed. Second one was, okay, there's a sort of a riddle, but I think it was pretty obvious. They're dwarves, they know. And again, going back to the stuff that my great great grandchild might know, right? The fact that they say, hey, the last line on Durin's Day, it's counting on the fact that dwarves will know this and potentially non-dwarves will not know this. So this is that sort of callback to specialized information. Dwarves are gonna know about Durin's Day, and then we got to get to that door. And that really is the third part of the puzzle. Isn't getting through the door, it's making sure you are there by Durin's Day, which put a time limit on it. So they were able to actually get this whole puzzle before they actually got to the place of the puzzle. They already had these elements of the puzzle. Another example of a puzzle room I think that came to mind when I first started thinking about this video was Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. The actual entrance is this puzzle that's in the bathroom, and there are a couple elements to this puzzle. I think one, they had to determine that they knew some information about the creature. I think it was some kind of serpent or serpent-like. It had a connection to like a Slytherin, which is sort of has serpent connections house, and also that I forget whatever they call it, the snake language. The other puzzle they had to figure out was where it was coming from, and they were able to figure that out. And there was something to do with little spiders, but there's also the point that there's that ghost that lives in the bathroom, and they found out that she was a victim of that serpent creature. So that led them to, okay, it's in the bathroom. And then they put these things together to say, okay, we got to speak snake language at this sort of looked like a fountain or something, but I guess it was dry fountain in the bathroom. And that was the puzzle. So you had multiple elements of the puzzle, only one of which was tied to that room, or I guess two if you count the girl being there. But basically, there were other elements of information that Potter and the crew picked up outside the actual location of the puzzle that helped them get to the puzzle. And I think this is important, or it's a good thing to give to the party because it gives them that flexibility, it gives them things to think about. And then when they come to the area, this is that key, like, oh, they talked about this. The map had a reference. When you got a map to the fire temple, it had a reference to the flower room. And now we're at the flower room. And maybe it said something else about that. And it makes sense that this information will be out there because the reason why you're putting any kind of puzzle space in there is because you think people are going to need to get in there beyond which you're going to be able to tell them about it directly. So the information has to be out there because you need somebody to figure it out. If you don't want anybody to figure out, you don't want anybody to get in there, you're not going to put a puzzle there. Or you're going to put a covert puzzle like a secret door and you just got to find the latch or something like that, right? You're not going to put an overt puzzle if you don't want somebody eventually to solve it. And oftentimes, if you want somebody to solve it, you have to give them some extra information, either directly or through clues. So plant the clues for the puzzle, not only in the room, but in the dungeon and then outside the dungeon. Really build it from scratch so that don't think about it just when the party is getting to the temple. Oh, I'm going to put a puzzle here. To think about it when they're in advance, or add some extra material when you're just talking about this dungeon, so that when they get there, you can pull that in and say, oh, there's the room of the garden room in this fire temple. And then when they get in the garden room, oh, this is it. And now we can look back at our notes, or we can look at this thing and say, okay, the garden room had this. I see the flower connection. There are these other things. So you're giving them the tools to do this completely in the fictional world. So you've got the context, you've got the foreshadowing, you've got the clues, you got everything. So I think when you get there, it feels really part of the world and not just, okay, I'm going to back out and now as a player, I'm just going to do some kind of puzzle. When you're looking at covert puzzles, you're really looking to conceal things. And the door in the Hobbit on the mountain is also that sort of trap. You're trying, or sort of puzzle in that you're trying to conceal it, but you're trying to conceal it recognizing that somebody's going to have to get through eventually. Now, there may be in some cases where you don't care if somebody makes it through eventually. You're doing the puzzle because, one, it's easier to conceal it than to lock the door, than to lock it from the standpoint of if nobody knows it's there, nobody's going to look for it, right? So if you're going you need to get to the Bat Cave, yeah, you could just have a big, heavy glass door, reinforced steel door to the Batcave and just have it locked it all the time. But of course, what happens is anyone who gets into Bruce Wayne's Bruce Wayne Manor, is potentially going to want to get in that lower just to see what's on the other side. Because why would you have a giant reinforced steel door in the middle of your house? Or, potentially if somebody breaks in, they might find it. The other thing is, if you have a key, you could lose the key. If it's a secret door behind a bookcase, you're never going to lose the bookcase. You're always going to be able to remember something about the bookcase to get it open. You may even forget, which book do I have to bend? But you could always just go and just hit every book until you hit the right one. But it's there. And so you'll always be able to get in there. And you also are going to be sure that someone's going to really have to go beyond the call of duty to get through there. That's why you put a sort of concealed, covert puzzle in. Is not because you're looking for people to solve it. You're looking to avoid the issues of either having locked doors or obvious protection, because having obvious barriers will oftentimes lead people to want to break through them. That's why you have a covert puzzle. But of course, when the party's adventuring, how do they realize there's a covert puzzle there? Well, if the puzzle's doing its job, they're not, right? But oftentimes you're coming to a place far after its glory days, so you can use that to display or reveal parts of the workings of this puzzle. So, for example, there's a hidden door, and originally it was hidden. It was really hidden really well, and you couldn't see it. There was no seams between the door and the rest of the wall, but of course that was 500 years ago. Now there are some cracks and seams, and so you can kind of see where the door is. And maybe you can wait to see if somebody actually takes a look. It might not be that obvious, but you can kind of see where this outline is there. But the fact is that it still seems like it's solid stone. You can't see where the hinges are, or the hinges are on the other side. Who knows if you could bang it open on or just break it. So now you're cued into, okay, maybe there's a mechanism here. I can do that. Same thing it could be a trap, right? Or a hidden staircase going down, or something in the ceiling going up. At some point, it might have been really hidden, and you just wouldn't have no way of knowing, but that was a long time ago, and it just hasn't been maintained, and so it is decayed to the point of rendering it a little bit more obvious, in which case, then you're saying, okay, we see there's a pit here, we got to find out where it is, or okay, we see there's a panel in the ceiling, we got to figure out how to get in there. And what I like about those, by the way, is that it opens up other possibilities. So if you're in the dungeon, you see that there's this kind of secret door there, and you just can't figure out the puzzle part, you do have the option of, yes, you could just break it down. You could get mallets, you could get hammers, you could get axes, whatever it is, and you can hammer it out there. But one, that's going to take a long time. You're going to make a heck of a lot of noise. And those things together are a pretty good deterrent, at least at first, of not trying to figure out how to get it open quietly. Oh, and the other way is you can't necessarily close it behind you. So you go in a tunnel and you're able to close the door behind you. Maybe nobody knows you're in there. You can kind of keep sneaking along. If you've broken the thing open and busted it all out, then anybody who walks by is going to know that you went that way. So you have reasons for trying to do it the puzzly way, but you also have options if you can't get the puzzle. So you're not hitting that dead end. And I guess that's the last thing maybe I'm going to mention about all these sorts of puzzles. You want to avoid making it a dead end situation, where you're just sitting there, in which the party's just sitting and can't figure out what to do, and there's nothing to do. Usually I find with environmental puzzles, there's usually a way through. It may be risky, it may be dangerous, or at least the party could go, okay, we need more rope. I'm going to go back and get more rope, or I will use the spell Otto's Irresistible Rope, and I'll just create more rope, whatever it is. I think that when coming up against physical, environmental puzzles, whether it's encounters that you can potentially avoid, or again, things happening in the world, cave-ins and pits and things you got to swim across and climb, whatever, the party, generally that's kind of in their wheelhouse of, this is the kind of thing we are equipped for. We have packs full of gear for this very reason of dealing with all these different possibilities, so we can deal with that. But when it comes to the kind of esoteric puzzles, you're outside that wheelhouse often. And then you can end up in a spot where there just is very difficult, or there's very few ways, there's very few options but a particular fixed path going forward. If you have to get down the trap door and the trap door is tied to the puzzle, you've presented a situation that there's only one path forward and there's only one way to do it. So you have to find the one answer. Whereas if it's get across a ravine, there could be hundreds or thousands of different ways to do it. You just have to figure out which one you're equipped for that maybe fits your abilities the best and then do that. Which is why, just to reinforce the context, the foreshadowing, the dropping tons of clues, all that stuff, and potentially giving them that out. Okay, you can see the faint outline. You can either do it this way, which is going to be faster, quieter, stealthier, or you could try to brute force it. Now, the brute forcing element isn't necessarily good for all puzzles, and going back to that OA video, Puzzle House video I did, it talks about in the sort of spiritual, magical aspect. If you're thinking about it like a temple complex, hey, you have to prove that you're spiritually elevated enough to get through here, then potentially you can't brute force your way through because that defeats the purpose of the puzzle. And potentially it's magical and mystical, and maybe the god's essence is wrapped in there, so you can't do that. But these are things that you want to make sure that you are communicating to the players, so they don't feel like you're just taking away options just because. That they know that through the context, through the clues you've given them, through the information to be able to glean, that this is something we have to do. We have to undergo this trial to get through, and we can't just bust down walls to get to the other side. It's a bigger, the puzzle has a higher meaning than that. We have to go down that path. We have to take this spiritual journey. And I think if you communicate it up front and they can prep for it and they're aware of it, then that's something that they're going to be okay with, and they'll have their minds in the right place. So I hope that helps create some better puzzle rooms. Let me know if you have any other ideas, if you think I missed anything, if you just have good examples to show. I'd love to see them. Otherwise, I will talk to you later.